Welcome, friends of the Greasy Shop Rag. Today we're going to take a look at a Stihl 018C chainsaw. Customer complaint is that it's hard starting, and when it does start, it lacks power. So the first thing we're going to do is look in the fuel tank, just like we always do. We want to see if there's any good looking fuel, if there's any water in the tank, the condition of the fuel filter, and then we're also going to pressure test the fuel line. So when I'm doing this pressure test, in this case I'm getting kind of some weird results. So the pressure's going up and it's kind of dropping back down and stabilizing. It's not something that I normally see, and it looks like it's only doing it above 5 pounds of pressure. I normally only pump them up to 10 pounds. So we want to take a little bit closer look at that fuel line and see what's going on. First we'll remove the air box, and then we're going to pop this cross shaft that's got the stop switch on it. We're going to kind of pop that out of its holder, make room to yank that fuel line out of there. Now this fuel line can be tested outside of the saw, obviously, and it feels a little spongy. So we plug one end and we pump it up, and we can see that the needle goes up and then drops back down a few pounds. And I think what's happening there is the thing is getting so soft that it's ballooning and giving me them weird results. So we think that a fuel line is going to be the bulk of the problem here. We're going to take a look in the cylinder and make sure that moving forward is worthwhile, and it does look nice and clean and shiny in there. So now to remove our throttle linkage, if we squeeze the trigger, hold the throttle open, and then put our finger on the linkage of the carburetor and then relax our finger on the trigger, that linkage dang near pops out of the carburetor linkage. So that's how you get that off of there. The choke on the other side just kind of pulls out of that cross shaft. We'll blow a little bit of debris out of here so we can move forward with the repair. Blow some debris off the carburetor. Now let's open up the carb and take a look at what there is to see. Based on the age of the fuel line, I suspect that the carburetor just needs a gasket and diaphragm kit, just so that this repair doesn't go out and work for a few months and then come back with a totally separate problem of old carburetor gaskets. And that diaphragm wasn't in that bad a shape, but we don't know how much life it had left in it. And anytime I open up the carb, it's going to get new gaskets anyway, so it gets a kit. The little micro screen inside the carburetor was clean. That's a good sign. When you're blowing these carburetors off, just be careful where you're blowing air and how much pressure you're using. There's a chance of wrecking something. If there's a one-way check valve in there, you get the possibility of wrecking that. On this fixed jet carburetor, we want to pull the main jet out, take a look, and make sure that everything's cleaned in that passageway. Then we're going to use a little bit of carb cleaner to lightly blow through there. The pressure in the can of the carb cleaner is enough for this job. An alternative would be to drop it in the ultrasonic cleaner and let that do the work, but from what I've seen so far, I don't think that the carburetor was a huge part of the problem here. We just want to take a look at this jet, make sure that it's clear. And once we've determined it's okay, we'll put it right back into the carburetor. You don't have to get crazy tight with these things. Just make sure they're snug in there. It's just a brass jet. There's a good chance of stripping it. Not the thread so much as the slot that the screwdriver goes in. A little bit more carb clean, a little bit more light air pressure, just to blow things through. Here's our new needle valve. I always clean off the tip of those valves. Depending on who makes the kits, sometimes they come with a coating on them. And you can see that it's actually wiping off some gunk that was on there. I think that stuff is supposed to protect the rubber tip. But I have seen guys put things, carburetors together, and they had so much gunk on those things that they end up having a problem with the needle not seating. So we're going to get the spring of the metering lever spring in place. It's easiest to use a screwdriver like that instead of trying to pick it up with your fingers. Set it in place, drop the metering lever and the needle in place. Get the cross shaft on that metering lever to drop down and then tighten the screw. Now the next step is very important. Inspect the orientation of the spring. On some carburetors it's pretty easy for that spring to kind of pop out of place. And everything's so small there, and you got your big fat fingers in there trying to get everything lined up that you don't always see what's going on while you're assembling it. Now the video is not very good, but in this case that spring kind of laid over, and it's not standing straight up and down between the carburetor and the metering lever. So we're going to kind of reset that. Yeah, I know, I put it together wrong.
Bullshit detected. Take precautions.
But the important part is that I caught it before I sent it out that way. Next step, check our metering lever height. In this case, it should be flush with that top level of the carburetor. If you need to adjust it, you would kind of bend it, holding the needle in place and then bending the lever up or down where it had to go. We'll get our gaskets, our pump gasket, I should say our pump diaphragm, and our pump cover gasket put into place. One screw holds the cover down. And then we'll assemble our metering metering chamber gasket and our metering diaphragm gasket, the standard gasket and then a diaphragm in that order. And this cover has to go over the top. In this case there's just a kind of a dead hole that a pin on that cover lines up with. Two screws hold it in place. Note that there's a hole in that cover. You got to be careful sometimes when you're diagnosing a saw. That hole can get plugged up, or sawdust can get in that hole and block the metering diaphragm. So it's one more thing to consider when you're diagnosing these things. Alright, we got our throttle linkage back on. We're going to drop our new fuel hose in place. If you need to put a little bit of grease or lube on the hose to get it to pass through the fuel tank, then do that. I know some people claim that the grease is going to shorten the life of the hose. I don't think it's going to shorten the life of the hose any more than the fuel in the tank will shorten the life of the hose. So I guess I wouldn't get too worried about using a little bit of grease on that hose to pull it through. We got our fuel line attached to the carburetor, and now we're going to put a new fuel filter on the end of the hose. Drop it in the tank and make sure it's laying the way it should be. The way I just slapped it in there, the filter was kind of hanging up by the throat of the tank, and there would have been some starvation problems like that. So always take a look at how it's laying in the tank. Throttle linkage is on, choke linkage is going on. A little bit of a function check, make sure everything works the way it's supposed to. Our air box is going to go back in place. And I think in this case we're going to reuse the old air filter. I just blew a little bit of debris off of it. It didn't look that bad. The fuel that was in the tank was decent, so we saved it. We're going to put it right back in. Plus, if we know it runs, if we see it run now, we know that fuel was good. So we're going to give it a try, see if she runs. That's all I got for you on the Stihl 018C chainsaw tune-up. Thanks for watching. Later.